Madam President, tomorrow the House of Representatives is expected to do something that is not normal, but which is actually a rather extraordinary act, and that is to transmit articles of impeachment against the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. Over the last 3 years, Secretary Mayorkas has presided over an unprecedented security crisis at our southern border. The numbers vary, but roughly 7.4 million migrant encounters, more than 1.8 million gotaways, people simply evading law enforcement and melting into the great American heartland, untold amounts of fentanyl and other deadly drugs pouring into our country that killed 108,000 people last year alone. Then there are the children, 400,000 children placed with sponsors in the interior of the United States that have since been abandoned, literally, by the Biden administration. They say it's not their problem. They don't need to know whether they're going to school, whether they're getting the health care they need, or whether they're being trafficked for sex or involuntary servitude. Secretary Mayorkas, as the agent of the Biden administration responsible for this, has willfully and systematically refused to enforce our immigration laws. He has taken a bad situation and actually accomplished an amazing feat. He's actually made it worse, not better. Not only that, he's violated the public trust by repeatedly lying under oath to Congress and the American people. If these aren't impeachable offenses, I don't know what would qualify. Secretary Mayorkas must be held responsible for his actions, and I'm glad our colleagues in the House took the first step toward public accountability. The ball will soon land in the Senate's court, and it's alarming that we're hearing from the Senate Majority Leader and our Democratic colleagues that they are preparing not to hold a trial, which is what the Constitution and Senate rules require, but rather to sweep it under the rug without ever even holding a trial. That would mark the first time in American history that's happened and establish a dangerous new precedent. It's not too late, though, for our Democratic colleagues to abandon this misguided plan. But if they move forward, they should know that Republicans will use every tool available to us to try to force a full trial. Republican senators are preparing points of order to prevent Democrats from violating the Constitution and Senate rules. But of course, we are realists. We understand that if all 51 Democrats stand together, they can run roughshod over the Constitution and those same Senate rules. I plan to raise a point of order on the increased number of encounters with illegal immigrants that happen to be on the terror watch list. These sorts of encounters used to be extremely uncommon. During the Trump administration, Border Patrol didn't encounter more than 6 suspected terrorists in a given year. When President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas took over, that changed dramatically. Last year alone, Border Patrol encountered 172 suspected terrorists, more than 98% of them from across the southern border. We don't even know out of the 1.8 million how many more people who are on the terrorist watch list that simply evaded law enforcement. So there could be, probably are, many, many more. Making matters worse, at least some of these individuals have actually been released by the Biden administration into the interior of the United States. Last week, for example, NBC News reported that an Afghan migrant on the terror watch list who was arrested by Border Patrol is now roaming freely in the United States. He was first apprehended last March for illegally crossing the border. Agents suspected that something was up, and then they lacked information enough to reach a conclusion about whether he actually was or was not on that list. But rather than detain him, while they attempted to verify his identity, Customs and Border Protection released him. Making matters worse, they didn't even notify Immigration and Customs Enforcement about his potential terrorist ties. The Border Patrol, of course, works at the border. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is the one who enforces immigration law in the interior of the country, including repatriating or returning people who have made their way illegally or who otherwise are a threat to public safety. Well, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, simply waved him into the interior of the United States under the Biden administration's misguided policy called Alternatives to Detention program. In other words, rather than detain dangerous people at the border, the Biden administration program is simply to release them. This same program actually allows these same individuals to apply for asylum, to receive a work authorization, and to fly within the interior of the United States. In other words, it does not restrict their activities one bit. It wasn't until February of this year, nearly 1 year after he was first arrested, that ICE was alerted about this individual's potential terrorist ties. ICE agents released the man in San Antonio in late February, and he appeared before an immigration judge in Texas last month. But for some inexplicable reason, ICE withheld from the judge information about the individual's potential terrorist ties. So without that information, the judge released the man on bond to wait his date in court in a year. Today, this man, who is believed to be linked to an Afghan terror group, is roaming freely in the United States. He could be anywhere. But this is just one example among hundreds of more, perhaps even thousands of more, of the many dangers Secretary Mayorkas has created and facilitated for the American people. So when the House votes on articles of impeachment, the Senate has a duty not only to be sworn as jurors, as we have done 2 times fairly recently, but also to call witnesses and hear arguments to understand how the Secretary's actions have impacted our country. And I would hope that Secretary Mayorkas, if he thinks he has nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of, that he would welcome the opportunity to defend and explain his actions. If he and our Democratic colleagues believe he's done nothing wrong, they have nothing to be afraid of. But of course, we all know, and the country knows better. Madam President, on another matter, as we all know, over the weekend, Iran dramatically escalated its twilight war against Israel and the West. Tehran fired more than 300 drones and ballistic missiles at the Jewish state. These were launched from Iranian soil, as well as by proxy groups in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. For years, Iranian proxies have launched attacks on Israel, and a number of terrorist groups, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, have the means by which Iran has prosecuted this war against Israel and the West. This weekend's attacks were a stunning escalation, because this is the first time that these attacks have been directly from Iranian soil against Israel. But despite the impressive firepower, the impact of the barrage proved to be minimal. An Israeli military base sustained minor damage, and several people were injured, but so far no fatalities have been reported. Amazing, given the firepower directed at Israel. Iran's failure to devastate Israel was not just a stroke of good luck. It was the direct result of Israel's strong defense, supported by the United States and others, and its close cooperation and work with its allies. The vast majority of threats were intercepted outside of Israeli airspace, demonstrating the effectiveness of Israel's air defense systems. And a number of Israel's partners and allies, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and several Gulf countries, aided Israel's defense against the direct fire coming from Iran. On Saturday, President Biden quickly condemned Iran's attack, and he spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu to reaffirm America's ironclad commitment to the security of Israel. So far, so good. But despite that encouraging and entirely appropriate statement, media reports indicate that President Biden's support may not be as resolute as those words indicate. Accuses reported that President Biden told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States will not support Israel's counterstrikes against Iran. In other words, any attempt to impose consequences on Iran for raining down 300 drones and ballistic missiles on Israel will go unanswered. That is hardly an example of ironclad support. By attaching conditions to America's commitment, President Biden has undermined deterrence. He's shown that his administration is more concerned about placating the supreme leader than in protecting Israel. And when it comes to Iran, there's simply no benefit to applying anything less than maximum pressure, because it's the only thing that the supreme leader understands. Iran, after all, is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism and one of our country's most brazen and dangerous adversaries, working deliberately and continuously toward acquiring nuclear weapon capability. Tehran is testing the limits to see how far it can push, and President Biden has consistently failed to push back on the Iranian regime. Given the president's tepid response, Congress needs to take action soon to provide Israel with the military aid it needs to defend its sovereignty. After all, more than 6 months have passed since Hamas terrorists attacked Israeli civilians, and the United States has failed to act on their request for assistance. It was last November, less than a month after the October 7th attack, that the House actually passed a $14 billion aid bill for Israel. That was last November. But regrettably, the majority leader refused to even put that bill on the Senate floor. We could have provided aid to Israel 5 months ago, but the majority leader wouldn't allow senators to proceed to debate, amend, or even vote on that legislation. It's true that the Senate did pass a security supplemental in February that includes support for Israel as well as Ukraine and partners in the Indo-Pacific, but so far that bill has not gone anywhere in the House. I hope that will change soon. But given Iran's escalation this weekend, we need to find a path forward to deliver that necessary aid to Israel and our other allies who've been invaded by authoritarian governments. Tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate, and a regional war between Iran and Israel is no longer unthinkable. We need to take action as soon as possible to provide Israel with the material support it needs to defend its democracy and not place handcuffs on their ability to establish deterrence against the Iranian regime.